Morning, everyone. Welcome to the TradeStation Masterclass. My name is Jesus Nava. I'm the Director of Client Training and Education for TradeStation Securities. It is always a pleasure for me to be in front of you to talk a little bit about the TradeStation technology, specifically how to create custom studies. So we're going to, learn a little bit about EasyLanguage today and learn a little bit about one of the more particular studies types that are available on the TradeStation platform, which are called ShowMes. And ShowMes, we're going to get into the details of what they're there for and what are the differences and how to use them in the different applications of the TradeStation platform. But today we're going to create a custom ShowMe using EasyLanguage, which is TradeStation's proprietary programming language that allows you to create custom studies and custom strategies. And before we jump into today's topic, let's just go through some of the disclosures. Keep in mind that every symbol and idea that I talk about is for educational purposes only, that these are not recommendations of TradeStation. Also, active trading is not suitable for everyone, and past historical performance is no guarantee of future results. We all need to be aware of the risks that are associated with trading online. Please visit www.tradestation.com/important-information if you want to read a little bit more on the details of these disclosures. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. So let's jump right into today's topic, which is creating ShowMes. And as I said at the very beginning, ShowMes is a proprietary type of analysis technique on TradeStation that does one thing in particular. It's going to mark the chart with historical alerts. What does that mean? Well, for most indicators in TradeStation, you're able to turn on an alert. For example, if you're using a moving average two-line study or indicator, you're able to turn on the alert and TradeStation will alert you whenever the two lines are crossing, right? You may be using something like the Bollinger Band. If you turn on the alert on the Bollinger Band, we know that we're going to get an alert whenever the price activity returns inside the channel from an overbought or an oversold level. So each study inside of TradeStation will have its own specific alert criteria that you get alerted on. However, those alerts that you're turning on studies like the moving average or Bollinger Band are only enabled for real-time triggers, meaning that you turn on the alert, and of course, if it is happening right now, you're going to be notified, but it doesn't really tell you when it happened historically or how long ago the alert was generated. ShowMes is a great way for you to mark those historical alerts, because what it does is that it finds historically every single instance where the strategy would have been triggered, and it's going to mark the candle with a little dot or a little cross. I mean, those are preferences that you can set on the ShowMe, but it'll tell you everywhere in history where that alert was met. And that's the reason why we, on this first bullet point, it says that it marks the chart with historical alerts, meaning that whenever it meets the criteria, you'll know exactly which candle or which bar that alert criteria was met. So it's designed to identify a bar that meets specific market conditions based on a defined set of rules. We already talked about that. Every indicator that you can think of can be turned into a ShowMe so that you can see where that indicator triggered alerts historically. So it's a very nice technology that enhances the visual of a lot of these technical indicators. And that's what this third bullet says. It helps you visualize or visually detect chart patterns and alert conditions you're looking for historically. All right. Some of the EasyLanguage elements that we all need to be aware of, and this is just in general practice when you're writing EasyLanguage. If this is the first time that you're writing EasyLanguage, we're going to try to go over and discuss some of the basic elements of EasyLanguage programming. That way, you're not completely lost. But the idea here is to give you a taste of what EasyLanguage is capable of doing and what we can do with simple instructions and the potential that you have with using EasyLanguage. Every programming language is made up of a library of code elements and resources, and we're going to learn that as we do these easy language classes. One thing to help you in identifying what each one of these elements and resources is that most of the code that you type into a development environment is color coded. So it automatically applies a color based on the element that you're utilizing. If it's a reserved word, it'll be painted blue. If it's a function, it'll be painted magenta. And if it's punctuation, I think there's a default color for that. I think it's just black. But a lot of the items that you use in the language will take on a specific color by default. And of course, that's going to help you realize if you've mistyped something. Because if something does not turn a particular color, it's probably because the language doesn't recognize it. And I'll give you a straight example. Average is a word that exists as a function inside of EasyLanguage. And when you type the word average inside of a programming document, it'll turn magenta automatically because EasyLanguage recognizes it. And if it doesn't turn magenta, it's probably because you mistyped it. So make sure that you look at the spelling and make sure you're doing it correctly to make sure that EasyLanguage is able to understand it. So that's one of the good benefits of EasyLanguage, or highlights of EasyLanguage, is that it color codes your language so that you know that you're in the right track, especially if you're typing in functions or reserved words. Punctuation is also a very big thing in EasyLanguage. You have to use the proper punctuation. And this is true in any language. If you don't use the right punctuation when you're writing in English, of course, the syntax or the message may change significantly by not using the proper punctuation. The same happens here in EasyLanguage. EasyLanguage expects proper punctuation, otherwise, those statements or those sentences that you're writing or programming will not make sense to the EasyLanguage engine. So let's go through some of the punctuations that you're going to be using. For example, semicolon. Semicolon is the end of a statement. So when you're finished writing a statement, you have to end it with a semicolon. This is similar to what you would use when you finish a paragraph. If you're writing an essay and you finish a paragraph, in English, you use a dot or a period to end that paragraph. Well, in EasyLanguage programming, we use a semicolon instead. That just tells EasyLanguage that this is the end of that particular statement, and we're going to go on to something different. We also use parentheses just to give mathematical formulas some structure and determine the order of operations. A lot of times it's also used to enclose the parameters of a function. And if a function needs parameters, then they're going to be separated by parentheses. But for the most part, we're going to use them as either part of a function or part of a variable declaration, or we're going to use it to control the order of operations in a mathematical formula, which we do a lot. Today, I think we're going to go over some of these, we're going to use some of these parentheses to control how our formulas are going to be calculated. We use comma, separates items in a list, like, for example, when you are supplying parameters to a function, you separate them with commas. So you use a combination of parentheses with commas because you have the parameters separated by commas, but they are going to be enclosed inside parentheses. And we also use quotes, and a lot of times we use these to create a label. Label inside of EasyLanguage, they are very useful because it clarifies your code. If you don't use labels, then EasyLanguage will just grab default names like plot 1, plot 2. And if you have an indicator that has multiple plots, having them numbered sometimes is confusing. So creating these labels allows you to assign a custom name to each one of these plots so that you can identify them so much easier. And last, square brackets. Square brackets, as opposed to squiggly or French brackets, allow you to do a historical reference. These are great if you want to know what the value of your variable is so many bars ago. Let's suppose you're calculating an average of closing prices, and you have the average, right now, which is in real time, is being calculated in real time. Well, what if you wanted to know the average 10 days ago? Well, this square brackets is TradeStation's own way of allowing you to reference historical values of any variable or any word that you may want to look at. For example, if you want to see the closing price of the bar 10 days ago, then these square brackets are going to help you do that. In our examples today, we're going to use a lot of these punctuation marks, but it's always good that when we start writing EasyLanguage, that we keep these in mind so that if we intend to use them, we know exactly what the purpose of them are. Variables are, and we've mentioned the word variable, since we started the presentation today, but variables are ways for you to store a particular value in some sort of container. And this helps you in programming so that you don't have to type in, complex formulas over and over again. I'll give you an example. Let's suppose that you're looking for an average. We've already used the example of average. And the average is a function. It needs two parameters. It needs, the value that's being averaged and for how many periods. For example, if you're looking for an average of the closing prices, one of the parameters would be the close, but then you have to tell it, okay, how many periods you want to, or how many closing prices you want to use for that average. That would be the periods. So if you say, I want to use 30 closing prices, then that's your second variable. So you're averaging the closing prices, but for a period of 30 bars, or yeah, exactly. In EasyLanguage, it would be bars. So if you have a 5-minute chart, it'll be 30 of the 5-minute bars. If you're using a daily chart, then it'll be 30 daily bars. So the time frame of the chart is what controls, the type of data that's being used. However, the periods are specified within the EasyLanguage. So a function like average, which needs two parameters, the value that's being averaged and for how many periods, you can take all that expression and put it inside of a variable, or have a variable hold on to that value. And that way, throughout the code, you can reference the variable and you'll be referencing the average of the close for a period of 30 bars. So what I said at the beginning, where you don't have to necessarily carry that bigger statement or that bigger formula around the whole code, you just have to reference the variable name that holds that formula. It just simplifies the code. It gives you a lot more readability, and not only for yourself, but anybody that's looking at your code. These variables have very descriptive names, and if you create names that tell you exactly what the variable is calculating, it makes much more sense, not only to you, but anybody that's reading your code. So a lot of times we do use variables for readability, but also to simplify, the understanding of the code. So some of the things that are included here, they're used to store information to be referenced and manipulated in a study. They're given a descriptive name when declared, and they increase readability, reduce typographical errors, especially if you have, big formulas that are being stored in these variables. Typing them over and over again increases the chances of you making an error. So if you house them inside of a variable name, it'll be much easier to just reference that big formula or that complex formula and avoid typographical errors, and of course improves processing efficiency. They must be declared and given an initial value. We're going to get to that in just a moment. And here's an example on how you declare variables. You just use the word variable, a colon, and then you start listing the words that you want to use inside your code. This word, the big buyer bar, it's something made up. It doesn't exist in the language, but we are making it, we are declaring it, and a big buyer bar implies that you've identified a big collection of buyers inside of a bar, meaning that the price has shifted up. And a variable gets initialized to either false true, which is a true false variable, or a number, because you also can have numeric variables. Whichever type of variable you're building, you have to declare that at the beginning. False true just means that it's a true false variable and it'll hold a true false expression. But many variables that we're going to be creating are going to be numeric, and those are initialized with a number. In this case, if we initialize that with a 0 inside parentheses, we're telling EasyLanguage that we're going to be using numeric variables. This will make much more sense once we start, dealing with our examples. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. This is an example that we're going to write together. It's called the big buyer bar. And while we write the code, of course, we're going to understand the different components, some of the things that are important for you to remember as you create custom ShowMes. So this is my variable declaration statement. This is my variable assignment. You see, once we declare the word big buyer bar, we have to tell EasyLanguage what that word means. So first comes the declaration, and then comes the assignment. We'll work on explaining some of the things here. So if we get a big buyer bar, then plot. And that's exactly what a show me does. It only plots if the condition is true. It's a very useful indicator in terms of identifying those certain conditions or those things happening on the chart. Let's go ahead and go and create our show me. And also in this PowerPoint slide that I'm making available to everyone here, I'm not sure if you noticed, but I pasted a link to the PDF so that everyone can have it. Let me just post it again. All right. And I'm also sharing a zip folder that has the indicator that, or the show me that we're going to be working on today. So in order for us to create this show me, we're going to follow these steps. First, we're going to open up the EasyLanguage development environment. I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. We're going to select a study type in the file new sequence. In the development environment, you're going to find multiple types of EasyLanguage documents that you can create. And from the beginning, you have to know which type of indicator is it that you want to create, because they're all different types. And if you start with a wrong type, it's going to be more difficult to switch. In fact, some of the things you use in one study or one EasyLanguage document may not work in another. For example, buy or sell short, which are actions you would use in a strategy, are not going to work in an indicator or a show me. You'll get an error because it's not intended for that purpose. So from the very beginning, you have to make a decision as to, okay, what is it that I'm trying to create here? Is it an indicator that plots a line? Is it a strategy that generates orders? Or is it a show me that is going to create a mark on the candlestick? Or is it something that's going to paint the bar? We've talked about paint bars before, and that's why I'm just bringing it up here. But you do have to select the type from the get-go. You have to give your indicator a descriptive name. We do recommend using a prefix, and I'll show you why. Then we write our code. We verify the code to make sure that the EasyLanguage development environment is able to read through it without any blocks. It doesn't really check accuracy, but it just checks that everything is in order. You have to fix errors if it finds any. And then you have to edit the code and verify it again. And then we go into properties to choose things that are scaling, style, color. So those are that's the way that the indicator is going to look when you put it on a chart or put it on RadarScreen. Those things are important. And once you set your properties and style, then you have to verify one more time. Notice that in 5 different steps, we have the verify process 3 times. And don't get tired of verifying, because even when you start your EasyLanguage code, and I do this on my own EasyLanguage programming, I tend to go and click on verify to make sure that I'm going well. Don't wait until you've written everything and then verified and you have all these, dozens of different errors you have to fix. As you go through the code, I tend to verify many times just to make sure that I'm making sense to the development environment. So that's why here in these 5 different steps, you have the verify process multiple times. One thing you cannot forget is to verify once you've changed the properties, like the scaling and the style and the color, because those have to be fixed into the code or fixed into the show me or indicator by a process of verifying. And then at the very end, you have to apply the indicator to your chart to validate your logic and make sure that it's the right display. Let's go ahead and get started in our show me, which I've shared with everyone here. So don't think that you have to copy everything that I'm presenting on. You have or will have a recording of this class, and you also have access to the EasyLanguage code, which I'm going to type up with everyone here, and we're going to walk through this example. Let me go over here to my TradeStation platform, and it doesn't matter what symbol we're using. You can see that on this chart, I'm looking at Microsoft, and we're going to put the show me or create a show me for this. If we have time, we're going to create a couple of show me's. I don't think we'll have time to do a couple of show me's, but you'll see how it works on TradeStation. Let me show you one that is built into TradeStation so that you get the idea. If you go to studies and you can click on add study, show me's are going to be in this add study dialog, and you find a tab here on the left-hand side for show me's. We have dozens of different show me's you can use. A lot of them are candlestick recognition show me's. If you're into candlestick analysis and you want to identify candlestick patterns, all the ones that start with the letter C and underscore, and some other ones do provide you a candlestick recognition show me. Let me show you this one right here that's consecutive downs and consecutive ups. I'm going to put them both on the screen. What these two show me's do is that it counts the number of times that you have consecutive ups and consecutive downs, and is going to mark the candle where that criteria is met. Let's go ahead and take a look. I'm going to click OK to this, and there it is. I'm not sure if you see the dots here on my screen. I see them because I'm sitting right in front of it, but a lot of times when you're projecting your screen through a webinar, the dots don't show up properly. I see a cyan dot or cyan dots at the top, and I see red dots at the bottom. You can make the dots a different color. You can make the dots a different style. I think we alluded to that when we were going through the steps of creating a show me. That's something that is going to be a personal choice, a personal preference. And of course, any of the ones that are supplied with the TradeStation platform can also be changed so that they are exactly what you want them to look like. But here, this is counting. Let me go ahead and see what the blue one is counting. I'm going to edit consecutive ups. And I'm going to go to the inputs. So this is counting 3 consecutive ups. Let me go ahead and change that to 5, just to make it a little bit more restrictive. The color I like, what I'm going to make the style thicker. So a bigger dot. And then I'm just going to click OK. All right. So if I look at my chart, there's been fewer times when you've had 5 consecutive higher highs. Is this higher highs? Let me just make sure. Let me go to the inputs, and it's looking at the closing prices. It's not looking at the high of each bar. It's looking at the close of each bar, making sure that you have 5 consecutive higher closing prices. So you can change that to the highs if you wanted to. Let me see that. If I change this close to high, instead of looking at consecutive closings, it's going to look at consecutive higher highs. Let me do the same with the lows. I'm going to edit consecutive downs. Let me make this a little bit more restrictive, looking at lower lows. And instead of using the closing price, I'm going to use the low. So one is going to be looking at the highs of the bars, and the other one is going to be looking at the lows. The style, I'm just going to make it thicker. And the color, let me change that to some pink so that it doesn't, so it's not the same color as the down candles. I'm going to click OK. And you can see that on this section of the chart, I don't have the criteria met. it may seem as if I do, but I don't. For example, over here, I think I have 5 consecutive lower lows. It is met here though. 1, 2, 3. The thing is that if the sequence is broken, then you won't get it. For example, on this particular area, I have 1, 2, 3, and it's reset here. Then I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then reset here. So even though visually it appears as if I'm having lower lows or consecutive lower lows, that sequence is broken by a little bit of an uptick. Let's see if we scroll back. And we do have the criteria met right here. Why? Because it starts off right up here and it counts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On the 5th one is where you see that pink dot. So even though we have another section here that it seems as if we have consecutive lower lows, but if we start counting, it's going to break that sequence. Here we have 1, 2, 3, breaks the sequence. Here we have 1, 2, 3, breaks the sequence. Here we have 1, 2, 3, breaks the sequence again. So maybe setting it to 5, of course, makes it a lot restrictive because it doesn't identify any of the consecutive downs here because of that break in the sequence. But you can already understand how the ShowMe works. It's just going to look at the criteria, and if the criteria is true, it's going to mark that candle so that you have that visual, enhances the visual. A lot of times, for example, these 2 consecutive higher highs, we can see that when they were identified right after we had kind of a drop off. Not every single time, because it happened here, maybe just a little bit, and over here it didn't have a drop off. It actually just continued to go in that same direction. But it does allow you to, look at the chart historically and identify these areas that meet certain criteria. Let me go ahead and remove these. So let me go to studies, edit studies, and we're going to remove those 2. Let's go to the development environment. I'm going to go to apps. I'm going to create my own idea and go to EasyLanguage, but just EasyLanguage right here. So everybody has an EasyLanguage app. All right. In the EasyLanguage development environment, let me just close any indicator that was open. You're going to find a drop down for new. And this is what we were talking about, different types of EasyLanguage documents. We have activity bars, functions, indicators, paint bars, ShowMes, strategies. So from the get-go, you have to know which type of EasyLanguage you're creating. In this case, I'm going to create a ShowMe because I want to mark candles on my chart. And I'm going to give this indicator a custom name. We use a prefix most of the time for my personal indicators. I usually use an exclamation mark JN for my name initials. The exclamation or the special character is used, or I use it so that it puts all my custom work towards the top. Whenever you use one of these custom characters as part of the name, it sorts to the top. Those special characters sort to the top, and you're not like right in the middle of the alphabet. So special character and initials, I use it as a prefix of every study so that every custom study that I create will be grouped together, because remember that all studies inside of TradeStation are sorted alphabetically. And if you're using the same prefix, of course, all those studies are going to be grouped together. So this will be exclamation JN, and I'm going to call this a big buyer bar. The idea here is to look for bars or look for candles that are significantly large, but at the same time have a big tail. Big tail meaning that the price probably dropped very, very low, but then it recovered because it found some buying pressure, right? And it closed very far or further away from where that lowest low was, and creating that way what's called a big tail in candlestick concepts, you see this very clearly because you have the body of the candle and then you have a little tail extending at the bottom. Because yes, that candle experienced some buying pressure and the price recovered from that lowest low. We're going to call that a big buyer bar, and we're going to try to identify those in EasyLanguage and mark them. So the first thing that we need to do, let me go ahead and click OK here. The first thing that I need to do is provide a way for us to determine how big does the tail have to be? And so that we have an indicator that we can apply on different securities, we can't really set it as a value. So we cannot say, well, the range has to be greater than 10 points, because 10 points may be different for something like Verizon, which is trading at $40, and to something that is much higher, like, for example, Chipotle is trading at 3,000. So we can't really measure, the length of a bar using a value if we're gonna be wanting to use this study in multiple securities that have different ranges. So let's go ahead and work in terms of percentage. So we have to supply what percentage of the range of the bar do we consider to be significantly big to have a big tail. So let's go ahead and create that as an input. And we create that as an input so that we have flexibility. So sometimes you may want to use a quarter. Sometimes you may want to use a third. Sometimes you may want to use half. So in this case, we're going to do a big buyer bar percent. Many times, if you're creating descriptive names, I tend to create my names a little bit too big. I consider this to be way too long. Big buyer bar percent. So I'm going to abbreviate this and say BBB percent. So big buyer bar percent. And I'm going to start this off at 50%. Notice that default values are set in parentheses, and then I'm using a semicolon at the very end just to end my statement. That's what I'm going to be comparing the tail to see if it's big or not. I'm going to start it off at 50%. So now that I've, let's go ahead and see. I'm going to declare some variables now. Variables, as we said, are going to be personalized type of formulas that we are referencing throughout my code. I want you guys to notice something. I typed in a little bit too fast and I mistyped the word variable. I know that the word variable needs to come up in blue because it's a reserved word, but it didn't show up in blue in my code. So that's an indication that I did something wrong. And if you see, the B and the L in the variables are inverted. So I'm just going to type them correctly. And as soon as I do that, you can see how the word turns in blue. Big buyer bar. That's one that I'm going to be declaring. That's a true-false variable. It either happens or not. Do we have a big buyer bar? Yes or no? Because that's what's going to determine the marking of the bar. Not only the percentage, we do need the percentage so that we can calculate what the big buyer bar is, but the big buyer bar condition is what we're looking for. We need to know if it's happening or not. And in addition to that, we want to calculate, well, for now, let's go ahead and do this. Just one. And big buyer bar is going to be equal to, all right, let's see what we do here. We need to find out the tail, the size of the tail. Now, depending on the candle, if it's an up or a down candle, the price that is lowest to the low, it's either the open or the close. What I mean by that, let me go ahead and switch to my TradeStation, because a lot of times it just makes more sense just to look at a candle so that we can understand what I'm trying to say. Okay, so we have a few candles here. On this red candle, let me take the if you don't know where to disable crosshairs, a lot of times, if I have crosshairs and I put my cursor right on top of the candle, I can't really I can't really see the tail because I have to move away and kind of. But if I want to point to it, I need to disable my crosshairs. Crosshairs was something that was turned on automatically on TradeStation, but you have the option to turn it off. In settings, just go to preferences. And in the display tab, here it is. Display crosshair lines with down click only. So only if I click and hold, that's when I see the crosshairs. You can do that on your TradeStation too. So now when I move around my chart, I don't see those crosshairs follow me. Now, a lot of people like the crosshairs, and that's probably the reason why TradeStation set it as a default. But now I'm able to point at the tail here and kind of, show you what the differences are. Let's go to make the tail thicker too. I'm going to go here into the symbol settings, the style, and on the wick, I'm going to make that wick thicker. Okay, that way you can see it better on the screen. So I was just explaining that sometimes, the wick is going to be the low to the, in this case, the closing price. This is a red bar, so it closed lower. But a lot of times, in a green bar, the close is all the way up here. So the tail is from the low to the opening price. So it all depends, if it's an up bar or a down bar, that we will be using either the close or the open to see the distance or the length of that tail. Does that make sense? So there is a function inside or reserved word inside of the EasyLanguage development environment that will identify which one of the two is the lowest. Not only of the two, if you have a whole list of values and you want the reserved word to return what is the lowest one, we can use this reserved word to do that. It's called min list and max list. Let's go over here to my development environment, and I'm going to use min list because in min list, if you put in the close and the open inside parentheses, min list will determine which one of the two is lowest. And that way we know which one is closest to the low and then determine the distance, okay? And then we're going to do minus the low. So whichever one of the two is lowest, then subtract the low. So once we do that, once we have that calculation, the distance between the low and that space, let me go back here to the chart. So once we've determined, the length of the tail, we need to compare that to the range itself. So how big the bar is, is it half of the range? Is it 1/4 of the range? That's why one of the first inputs that we declared was percentage, so that we can measure that tail in reference to the range completely. So that value has to be greater than the range. Range is a function. Notice that I'm able to type in the word range and it'll come up in purple. So it knows exactly what to do. You can go into the function and find out yourself if you wanted to. A lot of these words you can right click on. Let me show you what this is. Open the function range. And if I open the function, notice what the function is doing. Range is the high minus the low. It's already created for you. You can use high minus low if you want to, but since range is a word that is built into the language, we can use it right out of the box. So we want this distance to be greater than the range or one portion of the range. It can never be greater than the range because the range is the whole thing, right? The range is from low to high. And this section that we're calculating here can never be greater than range, but it can be greater than part of the range. So what do we do here? We have to go and take, multiply this by BBB percent. BBB percent is the percentage that we supply in the inputs, but we have to multiply the BBB percent times 0.01 so that we can turn that into a 0.5. Does that make sense? Because we have to turn that into a 0.5 so that when we multiply by the range, it'll be half of it. Otherwise, you're multiplying a whole 50 times the range. Doesn't make sense. That's the way we calculate percentage. You can calculate it different ways. You can divide by 100. Either way, we're just getting to making sure that we're expressing this number as it should. All right, so let's go ahead and add a semicolon right here. So I'm turning the 50 into a 0.5, multiplying the range. So this tail has to be greater than that range. And that's it. That's how we identify a big buyer bar. And all we need to do is say the following. If big buyer bar equals true, if we do find that big buyer bar, then plot 1. Now we have to tell the show me where to put the plot. If we put it on the low, let me show you what happens. Big buyer bar. There's a couple of things going on here, and I'll explain exactly what I'm doing. We're plotting the little dot on the low. So this is the location where the dot is going to show up. And this big buyer bar is just a label. We talked about having things in quotations. That is the label. It'll help us identify what the plot is. So this is optional, this comma and this whole thing right here. This is optional. I can just say plot in the low and that's it. But the label is going to make it better. It's going to allow you to also have that as a column name if you were to use this inside of RadarScreen. And I'll show you that in a moment. Okay, let me verify this. All right, so I verify. It doesn't find any errors. By the way, this is the exact same indicator that I'm supplying inside of that zip folder that it's in the chat. So you're welcome to download it if you need to. I'm going to go and change the style. Remember that when we were using the consecutive lows and consecutive ups and downs on the chart, we had to change the colors. Well, this is exactly where you do it as a default. Right click, go to properties. I'm going to go to the chart style. Notice that you can use a point, you can use a cross, whichever style you want to use, it's available here. Let me make a cross just so that you can see the difference. And I'm going to make it this second thickest. All right. And for the color, let's make this cyan. I click OK. And then I verify one more time. Remember that verification is necessary once you specify the style and the colors so that they stick to the indicator. Let me go over here to my TradeStation, and I'm going to add the show me that we just created. Studies, add studies, and then I'm going to go to ShowMes. The one that I created was exclamation JN, big buyer bar. The one that comes inside of the zip folder, it's @MC for masterclass. But if you're modifying yourself, just use your prefix. And here we go. So now this is my show me that is marking every bar where the tail is more than half of the range. Now, many times you find a very clear bar that had some buying pressure. That's why we call that a big buyer bar. You can see this bar right here where the price dropped all the way down here, but then it encountered some buying pressure and the price recovered, leaving a big tail. Other times it may not be as visual. For example, over here, take a look at this candle. It's a very small candle. And the reason why it's marked with this cyan cross is because, yeah, the tail is still more than half of the whole bar. But the fact that it's just a small bar in itself doesn't really play well with our idea of, oh, this is a big buyer bar, because the tail is not as big as this other one that we identified later in the chart. So there's got to be a size component that we can add to our indicators so that it doesn't count these bars that have a very small range. Okay, so we only are looking for significant, tails or significant buying pressure. When you have a small bar, Not so much. So how do we do that? Well, we have to continue refining our condition so that it doesn't count those small bars. How do we determine the length or the size of a bar? Using range right here. So I'm going to add another variable that I'm going to I'm going to call this big bar. Not only big buying bar, but just a big bar. If I'm declaring, or this is my assignment statement. If I'm assigning big bar, I have to declare it up here. Every word that you're going to be using inside your code has to be declared and then assigned. These are words that I'm introducing in the language because they just make sense in my head. This is going to be it's also going to be a true false variable. It's not going to be numeric because the big bar is a big bar or not. How do we determine what a big bar is? Well, the range of the bar has to be greater than the range. Let's do the average range. Average range for a period of 30 bars. I'm introducing the function average. Average needs two parameters. What are we averaging? I'm averaging the range of the past 30 bars. So look at the past 30 bars, determine what the average is, and the range has to be greater than that average. Does that make sense? So not only I'm looking for a big buyer bar that has the big tail, but also, and the big bar equals true. So I'm looking for two conditions. I'm looking for a big tail and also a big bar. Let's go ahead and verify this. It verifies successfully. Let's go back to the chart. I notice that this candle that had been marked before is not marked anymore because, of course, is not a big bar. It doesn't qualify because it's a small range compared to the ones preceding it. So now maybe our indicator is a little bit more restrictive in terms of identifying conditions, but it does match our idea of the big buyer concept, where there's been a big drop in price, but all of a sudden the bar encounters buying pressure that pushes the price up. And we can see that historically. All right. Let's go ahead, and before I let you guys go, I wanted to show you what this indicator looks like in RadarScreen. So let me go ahead and open up another workspace here and load up RadarScreen. Okay. Let me make a copy of this chart. I'm going to right click, copy window. I'm going to come over here to my new workspace, right click, and paste window. And then I'm just going to go to the window menu and arrange vertically. So now I have the chart here on the left, and I have my RadarScreen here on the right. Let me go ahead and remove some of these columns that I don't need. Okay, maybe I don't need the net change, and I'm going to add this new indicator that I created. So I'm going to go here to add study inside of RadarScreen. Go here to my ShowMes, and it is called !JN big buyer bar. I'm going to add it, and I'm going to click OK. Let's add some symbols here. I'm going to go to data, add a symbol list. I'm going to do the NASDAQ 100. The big buyer bar. All right, let me make this chart is daily. So let me make my symbols here daily as well. This column right here, big buyer bar, will only show information if the criteria is true on the current bar. Let me scroll up and see if it's happening. You don't see any of the bar. I may have to add additional data on the calculation of this column. Let me show you how to do that. I'm going to go to Studies, Edit Big Buyer Bar for all symbols. Let me go to the General tab, and there's a cumulative calculations checkbox available at the bottom, which allows you to add additional bars. I'm going to force the indicator to load additional bars. to see if it makes a difference. All right, we don't see any plots here on the big buyer bar. It may be because we don't have any big buyer bars at the moment. Let's go ahead and remove the calculation one bar back. Let me go back into the settings of the study. And there's a checkbox here that says update value intra bar. A lot of times, if we're looking for a concept like this one, which is looking for a big tail, or the price to have recovered, if we do it in real time, the bar is going to be calculating up and down, and it's not until it's closed that we know for a fact if it has a big tail. As it's building, we have no idea where the price is going to end up. So a lot of times, if we have indicators like this one, or a show me in this case, that require for the bar to be closed for us to know if it meets the criteria or not, we may not want that value to update tick by tick intra bar. We want it to probably wait until the close of the bar. Let me go ahead and click OK and see if that changes anything here. No symbols meet the criteria, which is interesting. So the conditions here is it's kind of restrictive because the tail has to be greater than 50% of the range. Let me see if we can get a condition here. Let me, instead of doing the NASDAQ 100, what do you guys say we do the S&P 500 and see if we get anything? Let me go to data, S&P 500. This will take a while to calculate. The big buyer bar column is going to load historical data and tell me if there's any symbol meeting the criteria. So far, I don't see any data inside of that column. It may be because no alerts are generated yet. If I double click on the column header, it should sort by those values. So I don't have to keep on scrolling up and down. I don't see anything. I mean, it could be that there's no, bars that meet the criteria. Let me go ahead and change the criteria here a little bit and see. Let me go to inputs. Now I'm going to change this to 25%, a little bit less restrictive. Let's go ahead and click OK. See? Okay, here we go. Now we have some candlesticks. We have some symbols that are showing some numbers in here. These are the ones that match the criteria. Now I have to change that same setting here on the chart so that it matches. So let's go here, inputs, and it's just a quarter of the range. We have far more alerts, but let's go ahead and look at the ones that are triggered here. For match group, MTCH, you can see that the alert criteria was met on the prior bar. Remember that we turned off the tick by tick calculation, so it's not going to be on the current bar, it's going to be on the bar prior to that. We also have EQT, and you can see how it has that marking on the prior bar. Oxy, same concept. Tech, same thing, the marking on the prior bar. So this is a great way of you identifying, behaviors or characteristics of different symbols and being able to mark those on the chart. Remember that when you use a show me inside of RadarScreen, you will only see data if it matches the criteria. Otherwise, it doesn't show you any value. On a list of symbols of 500, you can see that this particular criteria only was only meant for 15 symbols. So very restrictive in the sense of happening on the prior bar, not the current bar, but the prior one. All right. Are there any questions on any of the studies or any of the functionality that we talked about today? If you haven't done any programming, maybe the class was a little bit overwhelming, but it does give you, it does give you enough information for you to start creating custom show me's and custom studies. There is a custom show me that you can use inside of TradeStation. If you go to Add Study and go to Show Me, so you don't have to go and create it from scratch. We have something called, here it is, Custom Show Me. And we also have a custom paint bar, a custom indicator, but these ones allow you to change the formula whatever criteria, the ShowMes is looking for, and do it on the fly without having to create it from scratch. I do like creating these simple indicators from scratch because it does allow you to take the idea um, from the first version that you thought of it and how it looked inside of your mind, and have it show on the chart based on syntax that you write on the EasyLanguage document. All right, guys, this is my class for today. It is going to be recorded, so you'll have the ability to review it. You have access to the code in the links that I provided in the chat. So thank you for your support today, and I hope to see you in one of my future classes. Please check the events calendar for anything that's coming down on the events lineup, okay? Have a wonderful day. Great having you today.